So picture this, it's the early 2000s and you're in a cinema about to go and see, I don't know, Shrek, the first Shrek. And a trailer comes on and it's a trailer for The Lion King. And you love The Lion King. It's like one of your favorite movies at that point. You're not really sure what it is, like it's going to be a sequel or maybe they're going to re-release it in the cinema or something, but you don't care because it's The Lion King and you're hyped. And Rafiki goes to hold up Simba on Pride Rock and then it shows...
Hey, that's not Simba.
Who's that? At this point in time, Disney had been going through a very rocky history. They made it big with their initial launch of Snow White growing ever bigger and more popular with each movie, Snow White even owning its own special Oscar. But once Walt Disney himself died, the company was left completely aimless and without its creator. The Disney company would proceed into a downslide of reputation, putting out movies that would do worse and worse than the last, all culminating in The Black Cauldron, which bombed so catastrophically hard, it almost sunk the entire company. Enter Musker and Clements working on their first Disney movie together, The Little Mermaid, and the movie does incredibly well. Disney comes out of its slump and rises to the top again and would grow in popularity even more with each new movie, a growth that they hadn't seen since its initial inception. The Little Mermaid, then Beauty and the Beast, then Aladdin, and then Lion King. Disney just kept growing and growing. There was no end in sight. This is the era now known as the Disney Renaissance. But Mulan and Tarzan would see the end of the Renaissance for Disney. The 90s were over and the world entered the 21st century, with Disney now being at a crossroads. Their next big classical musical epic, Kingdom of the Sun, was in such production hell that the movie had been remade and rewritten so many times that many of the staff working on it didn't even know what was going on anymore or had quit. A new company with an ex-Disney employee by the name of DreamWorks had just hit it big with its first 3D feature film Shrek, and Pixar, the 3D animation division of Disney, had hit it big with its own releases of Toy Story and A Bug's Life. There was more competition than ever in the animation space, and with the new century having come, thus came a new generation to market to. What kind of movie a Disney movie could even be would be completely thrown into question. Writer, director, and illustrator Chris Sanders had previously worked on Aladdin and Mulan in the Renaissance era. He previously tried to make a children's book with an alien character he had designed, but had to put it on the back burner because, sadly, there were no takers for the idea. Cut to the early 2000s, and Disney is in a slightly experimental, more budget-conscious time, since the CEO, Michael Eisner, says that the next movie should be something much smaller. Since Hunchback didn't do great and Kingdom of the Sun was going through its troubles, they wanted something that wouldn't break the bank. Sanders decided to bring back the alien character that he designed, and instead of setting the movie in America or nondescript times in Europe like all the other Disney movies had been up to that point, he wanted something different that had never been seen in animation before. So he chose Hawaii. On a trip there for location scouting and research, their tour guide taught them the meaning of the phrase ohana, a Hawaiian word meaning family but stretching far beyond just the typical Western use of the word. It doesn't just mean family by blood, but by association and connection. Due to how important and ubiquitous family was in the Hawaii trip, Sanders decided to focus the entire story of the movie around that aspect. A Hawaiian family dealing with economic struggles and family issues, and how an alien that is designed to kill and destroy actually ends up bringing the family together. Stitching it together, you could say. The year as I'm recording this is 2022. Lilo and Stitch released in 2002. It is the 20-year anniversary of the movie, and the franchise by extension. It has been 20 years since I first saw it. When I first saw the movie, I was 6. I was born in 1996. Lilo in the movie is also 6 years old. she would now be 26. Everything is uncomfortably lining up for me to finally have to do this. We're gonna do it. We're gonna cover all of Lilo and Stitch. All 4 movies, the whole series, all of it, in this one video. First, before anything, we have to cover the marketing of Lilo and Stitch because it is so different. The whole premise, they go through all of Disney's history. They show off all the characters and mascots they've had so far, and they show this new creation in the middle, and that he is evil. This isn't gonna be some goody two-shoes Snow White. This is gonna be an evil alien character. And then they follow that up by making fake trailers that they put him into, the likes of Lion King, as previously mentioned, but also The Little Mermaid.
I was singing here.
Or Beauty and the Beast.
Somebody I'll be in my room. Get your own movie.
Or Aladdin and how he screws up all of them.
Crystal clear, but now
You get your own movie.
It is one of the most genius and creative marketing moves because it has stuck in my head ever since I first saw it 20 years ago. Lilo and Stitch, the movie telling the story of an evil genetic experiment that has been made to destroy anything, crash lands down on Earth, discovers a girl called Lilo, who is the kindest soul ever, and ends up basically reprogramming him so he's not evil anymore. It's E.T., but E.T. wants to kill everyone. You have Nani, Lilo's sister, Jumper, the creator of Stitch, and Pleatley, the agent who is an Earth expert who has been assigned along with Jumper to capture Stitch and bring him back before he wreaks any other destruction. Finally, you then have Gantu, who is sent in when the two of them fail to capture Stitch. So you finally go and see the movie, and what do you think? Well, for me, when I was a kid, when I first saw it, I mean, I was a little 6-year-old boy, and the movie was about a gross killer alien. I loved it. Got the McDonald's toy that snapped down on your finger that was a health hazard. I don't think I ever rewatched it, but I loved the pieces out of it. I loved it because of the relationship between Lilo and Stitch that they develop, her turning this alien from bad to good as the movie goes through. And Stitch was just a cool character. He was some evil little gremlin, and as a little gremlin myself at 6 years old, I really related. I loved how Lilo wasn't your typical ultra nice kid character. She actually had flaws and was shown off as really weird and violent. Like when she puts her friends in the voodoo pickle jar. I related to that so much, not that I did that specifically, but I thought that was super cool. She actually felt like a little kid for once. It wasn't like an adult cipher for what they think a kid is or what it was like being a kid for them, but they've moved on so much since then. No, it felt legit. It felt like a real kid was being shown on screen. And of course, I thought Stitch was super cool, and I wanted to have him as a friend, just like Lilo had. I would have killed for that as a little kid. That would have been the coolest thing ever. I didn't take a single notice of the sister dynamic between Lilo and Nani because I don't think I really even registered that it was happening, because I'd been hyped up by the trailers. I was there for Stitch, and so I don't think I even registered that Nani isn't her mum. Like, I'm pretty sure as a kid I thought it was just her mother, and that was it. I blocked out the whole dark story side completely. It was a really fun movie for me as a kid. I absolutely loved it. And then when the series came out, I completely binged that too. And then the series just completely blanked out of my brain. So much so that I forgot that it even existed. I would see Stitch around on t-shirts and posters and stuff, but even then never really register it. It wasn't until around about 2014 that I remembered its existence, because I heard that there was a direct to DVD sequel, and I wanted to watch it because I didn't know that existed. And then me wanting to do that, I then rewatched the first movie, and hey, because I was an adult at that point, I suddenly had a new perspective. So what was it like watching it as an adult this time? Needless to say, I had almost a completely different perspective as an adult now. First of all, holy crap, the story is really dark in the background that's going on when Lilo and Stitch aren't hanging out. It's about how a family got wrecked because their mom and dad died in a car crash, and the sister is struggling financially to even find any job. And if she doesn't succeed in finding a job and being able to financially support herself, the freaking child services are gonna take Lilo away. Oh yeah, but then there's wacky alien Stitch coming around and wrecking stuff. What? With this new perspective, suddenly the whole movie was different for me. And I want to stress, this isn't in a bad way. I still enjoyed all the Stitch stuff immensely, but it's like you had added a whole new DLC chapter to this movie I'd already seen. Like the sequence where she's dog training him to try and make him a better part of society while Nani's trying to find a job. As a kid, all the focus was on Stitch because, hey, he's why I was there. So, oh no, Lilo can't train Stitch. This is a bummer. And so when he dresses up like Elvis and the crowd rejects him, it's like, ah, damn, Lilo, you tried, but he just doesn't seem to be accepted by anyone. That's a shame. Watch it as an adult who gives a crap about, oh no, my dog isn't fitting in with society. Nani can't get a job because of you, Lilo. You've been wrecking all her opportunities the whole time because of your alien freak show. And if she doesn't succeed, you'll be taken away. The movie was even better on rewatch is the main point I'm trying to get across. But that was my rewatch in 2014. I then decided that in 2015, I was going to cover everything. So I was going to, in the nostalgia critic style that was popular at the time, I was going to cover all of it. I was going to cover the movie, the sequel movie, the pilot to the TV series, the whole series, each episode one by one, and it proceeded to completely burn me out after years of doing it, and it made me hate Lilo and Stitch, which was a bummer. This a franchise that I loved as a kid and then rediscovered as an adult, I suddenly hated and didn't want anything to do with it. It wasn't until this year, when the 20th anniversary came around, that I felt, okay, I'm ready to do this again. I feel love for the franchise again. So let's do it. So I rewatched it for the third time. Rewatching it this time, when I said I already rewatched it as an adult, but that was when I was like 18, and I've always had the thought that I'm like mentally 3 years behind, so I might as well be 14 in that first review I ever did. I'm a little child at that point. Now I'm 27. I'm actually an adult now. There are no excuses. Watching the movie now, when you see where the whole franchise goes, this first movie just feels quaint. I've very little really left to say about it except for like the parallels that you see between how Lilo is treated on Earth and Stitch is treated in space. And then the adult struggles that Nani goes through and trying to find a job, which I struggled with for years and probably will again in the future. So I know how rough that is. So it's always appreciative when there's something that shows that off. But the thing is that with where the franchise goes to and how much more I enjoy where it goes to, this first movie, it just feels like watching the pilot episode of a TV series that runs for a really long time before anything is really set up. It's a fun time, but it's not the meat of what you're there for. Now, before we move on, we have to talk about the deleted scenes, because some of these are nuts. Now, a lot of times with deleted scenes, it's a good and a bad case. There's cases where there's scenes that I think were actually better and should have been left in the movie. And then there's other cases where it's pretty clear why it was cut. For Lilo and Stitch, it's surprising because all of them, I think, were cut for good reason. The scene where Jumba attacks the house and Stitch uses Lilo as a hostage, which really rubs me the wrong way, especially because, like, his character-wise, he's moved on from that point. He cares about her at that point, so it seems weird for him to be uncaring like that, and how it ends with, instead of the gun jamming in this comedic scene, which then turns serious when the house blows up, he threatens to use the gas on the oven, and it's just kind of like weird and lame. Cut for a reason. Through the whole series, there's this whole weak side moral of going against tourists and tourism that they never really play into all that much, so it always comes off as like kind of half-hearted jabs. One of these deleted scenes is showing that, where it's the tourists on the beach are like surprised to see Lilo as an actual Hawaiian person, and then she threatens all the tourists are gonna die. It's just kind of weird. There's a scene where Lilo goes to feed Pudge the fish, her friend, and Stitch like kills the fish and then laughs as it gets eaten to death by birds, and Lilo gets attacked by birds, and that just rubs me all the wrong ways. And then, okay, no, there's one good bit to it. This line that she has where you don't let family members die, it really feels to me like a projection that because her parents died in a car crash, something that's uncontrollable to her, whenever there's an uncontrollable situation and people feel guilt over death, they tend to put that guilt onto themselves. So it's like she's projecting, she thinks she's the reason her parents died, and geez, that's really sad. But also it kind of goes too hard on the sadness. It like shows their graves and stuff. They go way too far with it, man. How it's done in the movie now, with her just showing the picture of them, it fits way better. And then we have the big one. Now, as mentioned before, Lilo and Stitch came out in 2002. 1 year before, in 2001, something kind of big happened. A certain terrorist attack that would shape the future of the entirety of America from then on. So it's understandable why the scene where they go to the airport to steal a plane and then fly it through the city had to be remade. I think what we got in the end works out way better than flying through the mountains. Makes more sense because we haven't seen a city for the whole movie. It's all very rural countryside type stuff, and we get the way cooler red alien ship design instead of just a boring airplane. Every one of these deleted scenes, I think, is cut for a reason, and the final result we have is way better. Thing is, this is then where things splinter off, because it goes into two routes where you can go from this point. There's either Stitch the movie, which is the pilot for the 64 episode TV series, which then leads you into the series, or there is Lilo and Stitch 2. The issue is both of them are kind of set up like it's a direct sequel to the first movie. When I did that initial project in 2015, I did it in the order that is pretty much considered canon. You watch the first one, you watch Lilo and Stitch 2, then you watch Stitch the movie and the series and so on. For this most recent rewatch, I actually decided to leave Lilo and Stitch 2 for afterwards. This would come back to bite me. But let's cover Stitch the movie first, because it's gonna be quick. Stitch the movie, okay. Direct sequel to the first movie. It introduces a majorly massive plot point. Stitch being called Experiment 626, whether this was planned or not, they geniusly retcon that to mean, oh, that's because he is literally the 626th experiment and there's 625 other ones out there. Jumba hides them in a pod. We get introduced to Mr. He'd murder me for saying that. Dr. Jacques von Hamsterville, the experiment creation buddy of Jumba that gets introduced, and turns out he is a cartoonish villain, but he's hysterical. Long story short, some stuff happens. 2 experiments are activated during the movie. The pods end up getting released all over Earth, and conveniently all happen to land on Hawaii. And Lilo and Stitch have to go and hunt them down. It's almost like that's a really good premise for a TV show. There's not that much to say about Stitch the movie. It's required viewing because it sets up the series, but it is definitely the most boring of everything the franchise has to offer. Because it's not the core Disney studio doing the animation anymore, it's Disney Toon, the TV division. The animation takes a catastrophic nosedive down. Famously, Disney Toon's budget was around about $5, so the animation couldn't exactly be on par with the movie. It looks fine. I'm not a person to complain very much if something looks ugly, but it's a big downgrade when you go directly from the first movie to this. And it's like, ugh. But it's a good standard setter for the TV show because that's what the TV show ends up looking like. So let's get into it. Want to hear the sound of my childhood and the sign that you were about to have a really good time? Lilo and Stitch the series ran from 2003 to 2006 with 64 episodes, which was a weird mandate that Disney were doing with all the TV shows at the time, where they could, if they were approved, get 64 episodes. No more, no less, only 64. And when you have set up that there are 624 experiments, you can't cover all of them. Fortunately, the Lilo and Stitch series, except for one episode, does a new experiment every single episode. This is what makes the show so good to watch. If there's an experiment or episode you're not a fan of, skip to the next one. It'll be completely different. Each one is different from the last. There's so much variety to choose from, and especially the experiments themselves, because of the necessity of having to be different and the backstory of they were made for destructive purposes. They can have different designs and functions and destructive capabilities each time. And it's just cool to see all the different designs that they come up with. It's just a fun, comedic, good time that you can turn on whenever you want. And if it's one of the good episodes, you're eating good, you're having a fun time. The thing is, this is the point where I would then go through and cover each episode with my thoughts on it. Thing is, from my experience in the past, that was the exact way to completely burn myself out, so I'm not gonna do that. Instead, I'm gonna split it up into 3 bits. Season 1 as a whole, with my top 10 favorites episode of it, then Season 2 as a whole with my top 10 favorites, then finally top 5 favorite episodes of the whole series, which was like pulling teeth because I love this series. But before we get into that, we have to cover one thing first. The continuity of this show is an absolute shambles, and trying to watch it in the order that it's put out will just lead to a complete mess. So because of that, whether you watch it in the airing order that it is on Disney Plus, or whether you watch it in the production order, the continuity is messed up either way. So I've made up my own watch list here. It might not be 100% foolproof, but this is the list I came up with from having rewatched the series multiple times and going back vaguely to fact check, so I may have missed 1 or 2 things, but this one is certainly much better than the one that you actually have on Disney Plus. So you watch Cannonball as the very first episode. This is very clearly the first episode because it sets up everything perfectly that you could need. It sets up how the experiment's activated in water, Gantu being notified via the experiment pod, the buggy being retrofitted for Lilo and Stitch to use it, them going against Gantu to try and catch the experiment, and then finding its one true place. It sets up everything perfectly. Then you watch the watch order as it is listed. So Richter to Fibber. Then you skip over and watch Sprout to Topper. Then you skip over again, watching Houdini and Sinker. You skip over one more time, watch Finder to Bad Stitch. Now, the reason you do all this skipping around, now you need to watch Nosy. This is because in the episode, Nani goes to a job interview and gets offered to work at a hotel. And then eventually at the end of the episode, she gets that job offer, where you then lead into the Melty episode, because that is where she then starts her first day at the hotel, which in the current way it is listed, Melty comes first ages earlier, so she gets her first day out of nowhere, and then Nosy comes ages later, where she suddenly gets the interview offered. It makes zero sense. Then because of this, you have to skip all the way to the end of season 2 and watch Link. This is because she's working with the hotel at that point, but also because Myrtle meets Ruben for the first time and she acts super freaked out like she's never seen him before, which if you watch it in the current episode order, she already has quite a few times, which makes no sense. Because of that, you can finally now watch Tank, where Myrtle meets Ruben and has zero reaction to him. It makes sense this way now. And finally, you end season 1 with the correct end of season 1 episode listed, Drowsy. Then in season 2, you watch not Spike first, you watch from French Fry to Snafu, so the current order, then you watch Spike. This is crucial because Spike has all the experiments in there hanging out now that they've been freed from Gantu's prison, which makes zero sense if you haven't watched Snafu yet, and suddenly the experiments that were freed in the Spike episode are suddenly back in prison again. And then finally, these are not crucial bits, it's just personal preference. I don't consider the asteroid episode as canon, or at least it's very questionable because the experiments that appear in Dupe, like Hammerface, he appears in this episode way before Gantu has even activated them. And in order for this to make sense, it would have to be after Snafu, where they all get freed at the end. So you could potentially view it as another series finale if you're not happy watching Spike as the final series finale, or it's just not canon. You can take it either way. I'd recommend watching Poxy. It's one of the very first episodes you watch because it is the very first episode they ever produced, and you can tell because it is rough. The animation is rough, the voice acting is rough. It's all really, really shoddy. So you can either skip it or just watch it as one of the first ones. You got to get it out of the way. Bad Stitch is pretty pointless because it's basically just the plot of Lilo and Stitch 2, but it's worse. And then finally you can skip over Skip because it does the flash forward adult Lilo and Stitch thing as a really rushed and really boring way, and that really bums me out. So season 1. Season 1 is definitely the one with the most iconic episodes. It has the quintessential ones. When I think of the series, season 1 episodes are the ones I think of. Episodes like Richter, Cannonball, Yin and Yang, Splody Head, Kicks, all classic episodes, all in season 1. It's definitely the most well-rounded. The episodes in season 1 that I'm not a fan of, usually at least they have an experiment that I'm really a fan of, or they're just kind of meh. There's never really any episode I can consider a truly bad one, except for Baby Fire. I'm putting that on the record. If any previous fans know, Baby Fire, my thoughts have still not changed. I hate it. I guess I should also get into Angel. Back in my review when I made it, I was super pissed. I really hated this episode, but funnily enough, when I rewatched it now, I didn't mind it at all. It wasn't one of my favorites or anything, and I still think that Angel's design is pretty lame, how it's just a pink version of Stitch and they put some tentacles on her head, but maybe it's because now How to Train a Dragon 3 exists, and I have seen how they went even lamer with the female version of the main character's design, and so now I think Angel is a masterpiece in comparison.
Like, it's literally the same thing, but she's all white. Like, how could you try even...
And also, I guess this kind of leads into... Oh, this is going to be funny to talk about. Okay, when I first started my review series, I I had a whole joke going where I had a crush on Stitch. Then weirdly enough, that somehow morphed to being true. Like, I legit did have a crush on him, which I think is why I then got really mad in the Angel episode. It was a mix of that, and it was also, I was a Lilo and Stitch, the two characters, a shipper of them at the time. So it was two layers of madness about that episode, whereas now I eventually realized that the true person to have a crush on was Gantu the whole time.
I think I love you.
Really? Tell me more.
Like, yeah, for anyone who knows me, the big, muscular, deep-voiced fish guy's the one I have a crush on. Oh my god, no surprise at all. But yeah, the Angel episode, I'm totally fine with it now. There's other episodes I get way more mad about or uncomfortable about. And it's neat to have the mix-up of her turning them evil at that point. It's not one of my favorites, but I think it's fine. Season 1 is a really great time. You can't go wrong with watching it. Even the bad episodes are mostly just kind of boring. It is highly recommended. So let's get into that top 10 then. Keep in mind this top 10 is not in a particular order. That will only apply for the top 5 bit. So top 10 of season 1. Cannonball. It's a really great first episode for the series. The experiment's design is really cute. You just get the perfect microcosm of what the show is to me. If you want to see what exactly is the series about, watch Cannonball. It's the best one you can go for. Number 2 is Clip, easily one of the best experiment designs and features out there, where she eats people's hair, and the episode is definitely one of the funniest ones out there. Just the amount of jokes that they pack in and funny scenarios, it's great. Yin and Yang, two experiments that are opposite elements of each other. You get a whole competition element to the episode, which is a really fun time. Splody Head, an experiment that can make stuff explode where everyone's trapped on an island. Slushy, an experiment that can make ice everywhere, which is just a really fun winter-themed episode. Not to be confused with Christmas-themed episode, that's a different one. And Splody Head actually comes back, and there's a really sick fight in it. Yarp is an experiment that makes really loud noises. That would be my number 6, which is really fun because you actually get to see Pleatly catch an experiment. Melty is my number 7, the one who can melt everything, which is a backbone for a really weird Final Destination time travel episode where it just gets crazier as it goes along. It's really fun. Finder would be my number 8. You have a competition between Stitch and Finder the experiment, who's great at finding stuff, and then you also have a side plot where Hamsterville goes down to Earth and she ends up teaming up with Myrtle of all people. It is one of the most interesting combos that the show ever does, and that's why it's one of my favorites. Plus, his design is one of those ones that is so simple yet so great. Amnesia would be my number 9, experiment who erases people's memories. It's a really fun time because you get to see Lilo and Gantu team up. And number 10 of season 1 would be Slugger. It's a sports competition episode, which is always a really fun theme to do. Slugger is one of my favorite experiment designs. I love his design and just how he always talks in like snorts. Slugger's great. Moving on to season 2. Season 2 is where it starts to get interesting because it is the most 50-50 you can get. It is either some of the best episodes of the entire series or some of the absolute worst, and there's no real knowing which one you're gonna get. The animation and voice acting does take a massive leap up though. It doesn't look as good as the first movie, of course, but compared to the $5 budget of season 1, it feels like you jumped up to like a good $50 budget. It looks really good. That's not to say that there aren't a few episodes in season 1 which have really good animation, like Sinker has excellent animation, but more often than not it's a kind of spotty one. Season 2, very consistent, always great looking. Like, just to show off the inconsistency of season 2, you take the first 10 episodes. Spike is great. French Fry is terrible. Swapper is good. Shoe is amazing. Slick is bad. Skip is a waste of potential. Checkers is bad. PJ is bad. Plute is really good. And then Snooty is good. Then Retro is fine, I guess, but Bella's terrible. It's just all over the damn place. It's best episode followed by worst episode followed by meh episode followed by worst episode. And another massive leap forward for season 2 was the crossovers that they did. This was a whole thing that the Disney Channel was doing at the time with its live action shows where they would cross over MCU style with each other. And Lilo and Stitch got in it and did their own animated crossover version. They crossed over with Kim Possible, American Dragon, Recess, and the Proud Family. And it was a huge deal. Kim Possible was huge because I watched it all the time. And American Dragon was huge because it answered the age-old playground question of who would win in a fight, the American Dragon or Stitch? And the answer was the comic book cop-out answer of, oh, well, none of them win because if we pick a side, then one of them is going to get mad that the other one won. Lame. Let one of them win. I remember this episode being a lot more hype as a kid. When you watch it now, their fight is like 10 seconds long and it kind of sucks. I do want to make a point though in saying that the best episodes of season 2 way outweigh the worst ones. Season 2 is really spotty, but season 2 has some of the best of the whole series. So let's get into that top 10 then. Number 1 is Spike. Spike works as a really good series finale because you get to see all the experiments there hanging out, and it's a fun quiz themed episode. Shoe is a bad luck experiment and you get to see them opening the Better Not breakfast. You get a whole wacky sequence of them trying to catch him, but since it's bad luck, they can't get him. Shoe is one of the best. Plute is really good because it's a team-up episode and it's like Felix from season 1, but done even better. Snooty is fun because you get one of Lilo's friends working with Gantu against her, which is a dynamic that really shakes things up. Morpholomew is a crossover episode with American Dragon. Rufus is then a crossover episode with Kim Possible, which is really good as well. Heckler is fun because you get to see the premise that the show has been working with the whole time being torn down by an experiment, just making fun of everyone and everything in it. Bugby is a fun Honey, I Shrunk the Kids type of episode. It's Hasagawa's Cats, which is one of the weird ones. Another reason why season 2 is not great. There's 2 episodes that are like half episodes. Instead of being 20 minutes, they're 10 minutes. And it's a real crapshoot of whether they're good or not. Like Ace in the other part of this episode is a clip show and it sucks. And then the other 2-parter, Glitch and Whoops, that one sucks. Whereas Mrs. Hasagawa's Cats is great. It is one of the best ones out there, I think. It's the one that you can put on just with no context. You have 10 minutes to spare. It's just a fun, quick little time. Mrs. Hasagawa has somehow ended up with like 20 experiments and they have to try and catch them, but then turns out she loves having them there. And then my number 10 is Snafu, which works as a really great series finale. All the experiments teaming up to catch the ones that had gotten away. Now, more importantly, we get into my top 5 of the whole series. Now, narrowing down this top 5 was really hard because doing those top 10s for season 1 and 2 was pretty difficult. This top 5, it took me like an hour to pick these 5. So when I say these are my favorites, be a bit lenient because it could have been more like a top 8. But I want to put in a top 5 just for if there's 5 episodes out of these 64 that I would recommend the most to any kind of newcomer, these would be them. My number 5 is Plute. As said before, it's like the episode from season 1, Felix, where he's been programmed to clean stuff, but then he ends up being evil with it and making stuff more dirty. Plute is that concept, but taken to a way more destructive, pollution-focused episode, and it's a team-up episode because Stitch is out of commission. Lilo takes previous experiments to try and take him down, and it fails. So then she has to go for a worse team, and they fail. It's really high stakes, really great action, really great concept. Plute is a damn good time. My number 4 is Melty, the time travel episode. This was a tough pick. It was either going to be Melty or Finder, which I love Finder because the whole squabble between Stitch and Finder of who's better at finding experiments. And Myrtle teaming up with Hamsterville of all people is such a good dynamic, but I loved Melty more. Just how Melty slowly progresses and getting more and more crazy, them trying to fix the timeline but screwing it up more, and to the ridiculous extent to where a cruise ship ends up crashing and they end up like breaking the whole fabric of time and seeing copies of themselves. It gets crazy, and that's why it's my number 4. My number 3 is Shoe, the bad luck experiment. This episode is one of the most fun ones out there. The whole chase of them trying to catch him, while it just gets more and more ridiculous with bad luck. It's like a Three Stooges, Mr. Bean-esque thing. It's the whole concept of the show of Lilo and Stitch versus Gantu trying to get experiments taken to the absolute funniest extreme. And it's just back to back from each other. And also, Shoe's just a really great design. And there's a really heartwarming element where the whole reason he's been acting like that is because Lilo hurt him and then she has to treat him better. Back in the day, I got really mad about its ending because they screw over Gantu, but rewatching it now, it's fine. He deserved it. My number 2 is Spike, the experiment that makes people dumb when they get hit by him. This works for me as such a great episode on multiple levels because his design is great. His power to make people stupid is great and really funny. The whole quiz show element is great because it's just fun getting to see the dynamics of Jumba is this like supercomputer level genius, but he takes stuff way too far, and then Pleatley is like an idiot, so he can't answer anything. And then Myrtle is cheating in the contest, and Lilo can answer stuff through the heart. And then all the experiments coming back to do this therapy roundtable session, which ends up devolving into madness. And then turns out all the experiment wanted was a hug. Ugh. Spike. My number 2. Which leaves my number 1, which a lot of those were big debates on where I'd put them. This, though, I always knew this one was going to be my number 1. One of my favorite TV show episode concepts is the hero and villain characters are stuck in some type of place, like a cave or an island or something, and they have to work together. And my favorite episode of the whole series, Splody Head, does that. The entire gang gets stuck on an island and have to work together to try and catch Splody Head. Stitch and Gantu are too busy fighting to team up. Ruben's just sitting there not actually helping in any way. It's so wholesome to get to see them actually all work together in the end, and you have this whole moral message about Lilo knows that Gantu is not actually a bad guy, that he's just doing this stuff for money, and she knows he's good, and Stitch doesn't really believe it, but then he comes around to that. Then Gantu kind of maybe shows that maybe he isn't that good, or maybe he is. It's moral ambiguity is the whole theme of the episode. Moral ambiguity and characters being stuck on an island having to work together. It's like some of my favorite themes all mixed together in an episode, and Splody Head's design is really great. Splody Head is just the best episode that I would recommend. It is the one where it's my number 1 for a reason. If there's any episode I would recommend the most, completely out of context, my absolute favorite, that shows what the show is about, the best that it has to offer, Splody Head is it. Overall, the Lilo and Stitch series is fantastic to me. It is one of my favorite things out there. It's like my favorite thing in the franchise. It's so cool getting to see each new episode how there's a different experiment with different functions and a different whole theme around it. Some episodes are focused on them trying to catch the experiment, while other ones they've already caught it, and then it'll be like a whole moral thing or some kind of how they're trying to fit the experiment into the world. And sometimes Lilo doesn't succeed. They end up getting away. She ends up letting them away out of anger. It carries over those themes from the first movie, that she's not perfect, that she's like an actual little kid. The series is a damn good time, and I love going back and rewatching it for a reason. But now we circle back to the crossroads from before, because we skipped Lilo and Stitch 2, which this time I didn't cover in the correct place like I did in my initial review series. I left Lilo and Stitch 2 to the very end, which I implied was a mistake. So let's cover it. Lilo and Stitch 2, one of the direct-to-DVD sequel things that Disney was doing at the time, covers two different stories. It is Lilo is doing a hula in honor of her dead mother, while Stitch is freaking out due to some kind of bug in his code and he's dying. Yeah, to say that this is pretty high concept for a direct-to-DVD sequel. When I first reviewed this movie, I gave it a lot of praise because, again, from the context, I didn't know it existed. And so the only context I had was from the direct-to-DVD sequels. They weren't ever really much good, like Kronk's New Groove or The Lion King 2 or Tarzan 2 or Little Mermaid 2. They were almost always the freaking kids of the characters and it was the same movie again, or it was essentially just a waste of time. Lilo and Stitch 2 is one of the rare ones that is actually a direct sequel, and it actually is covering something pretty damn big and weighty. Its animation is fantastic. It looks like the first movie, like almost exactly. So what are my issues with it then? If I really love the deep story it has going for it, especially for a direct-to-DVD sequel, and its animation is great, what's the problem? I hyped it up too much from the first time I covered it, because rewatching it this time, the problems I had the last time overshadowed it so much, and the things that I liked last time I didn't really like as much. The two criticisms I had at the time, which I still do, the stuff they do with Pleatley is awful. I don't know what they were thinking, but you can tell it's written by different people from who wrote the movie and who wrote the series. It doesn't feel like him. It's a big waste of time. It's cringy. It's awful. Skip. My biggest issue with it, though, is that they couldn't get the voice actor of Lilo back again. They got back everyone for the movie. Just like with the series, which is what made the series so special to me, every single voice actor from the movie came back for the series, except for David, which he's a side character of side characters, so he didn't really matter. Every single other one came back for it. And that's what makes it feel so much more canon, is because it's the actual same characters. But in Lilo and Stitch 2, one of the deepest and darkest things the series has to offer, really well animated and really good story, they couldn't get Lilo back because she was too busy voice acting for the series already. What? No, I can't do your Lilo and Stitch thing because I'm too busy doing this Lilo and Stitch thing. And it feels petty, but Davy Chase from the movie comes back for the series, but then for this they got Dakota Fanning, who I've no issues with Dakota Fanning. She's great, but the issue is that she isn't Lilo. Dakota Fanning has a tendency to overact, which isn't real. I mean, yes, Lilo is very energetic and violent and stuff, but it's a different kind. She overacts a lot of lines that Lilo wouldn't do. It just doesn't feel like the same person, like the character does. But it's so weird to talk about. The voices really matter for characters, even if it's written by the same people. It's just being voiced by someone different can make it not feel like the same one. My peak version of this movie would be just cut out all the Pleatley crap and use an AI to put in Lilo's original voice into this movie, and then it would be great. Wouldn't be my favorite of the series or anything, but I would put it pretty damn highly there, because the whole dynamic of Lilo trying to do a hula for her mother is really touching and emotional, and its ending, speaking of being touching and emotional, spoilers, I really love how they convey Stitch in this. One of my issues with the series is that they make him act a lot more like an animal, whereas this, it covers more what he was like at the end of the first movie, where he could actually speak English lines and convey what he was thinking. He even says I instead of Stitch at one point, which is like, okay, the transition has occurred. Stitch is fully a person now. And Lilo and Stitch 2 capitalizes on that. They give him tons of dialogue. He feels like an actual character. He's really emotive. And they kill him at the end. Not a fake out, oh, you think he's gonna die, but then he's fine. No, he legit dies. He has his last breath. His hand drops down. They have a mini funeral for him. He is literally dead. And this is a direct to DVD sequel for your kids. If I had seen this as a kid, and oh yeah, like my favorite character ever literally dies, I know he comes back through the power of love, but those few minutes where he's legit dead, I would have cried for days. The headcanon I've come up with as to why he acts so differently is because he dies at the end. So at the end of the first movie, he's changed from the monster to a calmer person. In this second movie, he has moved on from that point in his life. He sees himself as a monster from the past so negatively, he wants anything but to be that again. He tries to be good in every way possible. He's just so cute and kind, which is why when he then glitches out, it has that much more weight to it. And so to then see him revert back to the monstrous ways in the series, it feels like there's a really big disconnect there. Like they don't mesh together. The headcanon I have is that because he dies, it effectively reset his mind. Not completely, he still obviously remembers who everyone is, but he definitely acts a lot more like the Stitch at the beginning of the first movie in the series compared to the one at the end of the first movie and in this second one. So yeah, the headcanon I have, he acts different because he died and that reset his mind. Yeah, that works. So yeah, Lilo and Stitch 2, the definition of flawed. There's a fan-freaking-tastic movie in there. If you just cut out some scenes, you replace Dakota Fanning with Davy Chase, the original Lilo, it would be really good. The reason I watched it at the very end is because of stuff being different. Their house looks different to how it does in the series. Like Nanny's car is different. Nani and David are actually fully dating at this point, whereas in the series they never are. It's always stuff kind of gets in the way. It ends with this powerful message that Stitch has overcome death and they're always going to be together. It would work as a perfect series finale in a way, but that's why I rewatched it that way, but it doesn't. Back when I first covered it, I was so impressed by what I covered, it being a direct-to-DVD sequel, that I put it on a pedestal. Now when I revisited it, it wasn't as good as I remember, but it is still good, with some tweaks. So hey, is there anything else left to cover? Like, hey, I could cover the video games, I could cover those. I could cover the origin of Stitch, the little short, where it shows the origin of how he was made, and it teases the TV show before the TV show happened, right? There's nothing else to cover. Okay. So, back in 2015, I first started the whole Lilo and Stitch love series, where I was going to cover everything. And I before that, I rewatched everything. I rewatched the movie, I watched Lilo and Stitch 2, I watched the series and everything. And that was when I was then officially going to start doing the series, was because I had rewatched it all. I always told myself, though, I was never going to watch the final thing Lilo and Stitch ever made, Leroy and Stitch, because I wanted to leave it for the very end. The very end of everything. And so I never covered it. I decided that I was going to leave it until once I had gone through everything, no matter how long it was going to take me. I wasn't going to watch Leroy and Stitch until I was ready, until until it was finally time. And then the whole series kind of crashed and burned because I burnt myself out from covering the series. And then I proceeded to hate Lilo and Stitch, kind of. People would ask me to make more, and I hated that. It made me hate the series again from having covered it so much. And the last Lilo and Stitch love I ever made was in 2019. I didn't upload it until like 2020 because it took me 6 months to edit it because I was still in burnout mode. But 2019 was when I recorded it. And the series makes a point in its final episodes in Snafu and in Leroy and Stitch that the series takes 3 years. They make explicit reference that it takes 3 years. And with the 20th anniversary having come, it was in 2022, it was 3 years from my last recording of it. So all the stars had aligned for me to finally watch Leroy and Stitch after all this time, after 7 years. But I'm not ready to cover it because even though the whole project did burn me out, when I do cover it here, it'll officially be the end of it. And even though I did hate the series from having covered it, it still ended up being so special to me after having rediscovered it that having to fully put an end to it, I couldn't seem to handle that. Lilo and Stitch was always this thing in my mind. I had seen Leroy and Stitch when it first aired on the Disney Channel in, like, when is it? 2006? I was 12 at the time. I saw it when it first came out. I remember, like, how it kind of ended, like the big climax, and then that was it. And then that's when Lilo and Stitch left my brain completely. So I didn't remember what actually happens in Lilo and Stitch. And with this whole context of the amount of weight that had been put on it, the amount of time that I hadn't seen it since 2006. So it was 16 years since I last saw Leroy and Stitch. And okay. I can't put it off anymore. Let's complete the franchise and this project by covering the final thing that Lilo and Stitch ever made. Leroy and Stitch. So keep in mind the context of this when I cover what Leroy and Stitch ends up being about. Due to the break I had taken in 2019, I had felt like a failure and that I couldn't cover the series anymore. So I would never reach Leroy and Stitch. And so to me, Lilo and Stitch the series was this ending where it was just like permanently they were just going to be catching the rest of the experiments, because again they only catch there's 624 and there's 64 episodes, so still hundreds and hundreds left. So to me, I'd kind of thought of this headcanon that it just kind of never ended. So then I watched Leroy and Stitch. Leroy and Stitch is the Lilo and Stitch franchise's Return of the King. It's the Avengers Endgame. It's the return of the Jedi. It's the finale of everything that it's been leading up to. The gang have caught every single experiment and get awarded by the Galactic Council. Jumba gets the key to his lab back. Completely gets to teach all his Earth knowledge to a university course. And Stitch becomes the captain of a battleship. Lilo gets made the first Earth ambassador and gets to look after all the experiments that are down on Earth. But with caveat being, with all of these new roles, they don't want to go back to Hawaii. The opening credits then show a montage of the experiments that they have run into, waving at the camera, welcoming the people back. And already this was hitting me in my heart, because it's like they were waving at me for finally having reached this point, for finally watching the end of it. And it was such a satisfying feeling, because you've watched every episode. You know where these experiments come from. You know all the hardships they go through. So when you get to see them in their one true place, and you get to see how happy they are, it's so good feeling. With them having caught them all, though, and the three reluctantly having agreed to go back to Lilo because they don't want to have upset her, they now have nothing to do. Gantu is finally sick, and that he hasn't caught any of the experiments, and that he failed. And so instead he's doing one last ditch effort to go and break Hamsterville out of prison, and he ditches 625. I want to explain the concept of the status quo. When you have your sitcoms or your TV shows, whenever an episode ends, usually the next episode, it picks up pretty similar to the last one did. There's usually not any big changes. Like in Friends, they're always in the coffee house. With Lilo and Stitch, there were these status quos the series set up, that they would always be living in the house. Gantu would always be at that ship. And then this movie starts with Gantu leaves. He breaks the status quo that we have been in for 64 episodes, and he leaves it forever. And then Lilo, having figured out that the three are only there because they didn't want to upset her, she oh my god, I can't play the clip. She decides to let them go in this series that is, to a cheesy extent, it pushes this message of them being a family, even though it's not by blood, and they'll always be together no matter what. No one ever gets left behind. And she lets them go because she knows that they're not there for the reasons they want to stay there. They're only being there because they don't want her to be sad. And she says that, well, it's clear they don't need her anymore. And dude, I had to pause I gotta pause it right now. I had to pause the movie because dude, that made me cry, legit. Because again, this metric I'd set up for myself, that this headcanon that they would always be together, that the series never ended, and then I watched this final thing, and it shows that she lets go of them, that the status quo gets destroyed, and that she doesn't feel needed by them at all. And that is basically her feeling abandoned. And the two are all happy about leaving, because for them, having lived on Earth has sucked, which just makes it hurt even more, because the status quo that the series has set up, that's the thing that's in my heart. And now you're saying that you hated it the whole time and you're happy to be gone. And oh my god, this scene at the ship, I'm not ready to cover this scene. The thing in the series, it always ended with them finding the one true place each experiment belongs. And so with Lilo saying goodbye to them, she gives them the one place they belong. Jumba belongs in his lab. Completely belongs at the university. She's letting go of these people that are her family. She's saying goodbye to them. And then there's Stitch. Okay, I need to somehow correctly convey how much weight this bit had. It was beginning the bit about how the place he belongs is going to be on the battleship he's been assigned to. And before she can even begin the sentence, Stitch runs up and hugs her. And the score swells up. The score that they're using isn't from the series, it's from the first movie. It's tracks from the original movie, and it was just this nostalgia slam to my heart that, how do I convey this? The two hugging, that Stitch didn't want to go, and it kind of felt like it was art projecting life, because I didn't want this project to end in a way. I'd burnt myself out from it. I had ended up hating it. So initially when this old 20th anniversary thing came along and I thought, okay, I'm going to finally cover it, that, okay, I'll be happy to finally check it off my list. I can finally move on to greener pastures. Then him not wanting to say goodbye was like me not wanting to say goodbye to the series. And I had to stop the movie. And I cried for like 5 minutes. Not in the nice way of a tear trickles down. No, in the ugly, naked in bed at night, clutching my pillow, sobbing into it kind of way. Because this had had years and years of build-up of me going through my own failures, and then the series was saying goodbye. So these characters that I had known and loved for years, they leave. And when that ship takes off with the three of them on it, and they finally say aloha to each other, so it's saying goodbye, and then they fly off into the distance and it fades to black. Damn, dude, that was like the whole series, the whole project was finally saying goodbye to me. Not only that, but the whole project was saying goodbye. These characters that I'd known and loved for years. It's like they could finally move on. They weren't in this headcanon status quo space that the series I thought they were in. No, there's an official ending, and they leave. I'm not doing the best job of conveying it, but it kind of crushed me in a way. It was a good way, because it was really sweet, but it hit me way harder than it had any right to, that I had ever thought it would. And then what proceeds is a fantastic movie. Hamsterville ends up breaking out, so he forces Jumba to make a ultimate evil experiment. Lilo ends up teaming up with Ruben, who it's discovered that the sandwiches are basically like a depression metaphor, that when he finally stops making sandwiches and someone finally believes in himself, then finally he can actually be the same level as Stitch. And then it's also revealed that Myrtle, the reason she is such a mean person to Lilo is because her dad left as a kid. Gantu ends up getting ditched by Hamsterville, so then he teams up with Lilo again, like the freaking Amnesia episode showed. They all team up, and then the movie culminates in a final battle, like in freaking Endgame, of all the experiments fighting against Leroy, the new experiment, in this all-out brawl. And it is the most satisfying thing like ever, because again, like I said for the intro bit, you've seen the series, you've seen each of these experiments, you know what they do, how they act, where they've been put into their one true place, and when they get put in a fight, you know exactly what they're gonna do. And it's this amazing payoff that I can't think of anything else except for like Endgame of this rewarding investment. You get rewarded for sticking it out and seeing every single one of them. This is your reward. You get to see every experiment you ever loved beat the crap out of these experiments. And it's not just the same ones that it usually shows, like freaking Kicks and Yin and Yang all the time. It's weird ones, like some of my favorite ones. It's like Spike, it's like Clip, it's like Slugger. I cannot truly express how good and how satisfying this final fight is. And then it culminates in a musical number, which is the thing that I remembered seeing as a kid. And as a kid, I cringed at this. Even as a kid, when I was like 11 or 12, I cringed at this being the ending. Rewatching it as an adult, I freaking love this bit. Because they sing the song of like, the series is hammered in at this point, the Aloha Oe song, which is all about the family and meeting again. It cut through the beginning that cut to my heart of them leaving, and it's conveying musically that they're gonna be together. The movie ends with them being rewarded again, but they turn it down because this time they all realized, hey, the places we were kinda sucked, and we did like living on Earth that whole time and being a family. And Gantu and Ruben finally team up now that Ruben believes in himself and now that Gantu doesn't have to grovel. And they take a group shot of every single freaking experiment and the book on the series, and the whole franchise is closed. The end. What I then proceeded to do was rewatch the movie about 5 times. When I was saying that Lilo and Stitch 1 feels quaint, this is why Lilo and Stitch is the best thing that the whole franchise has to offer, because of how rewarding it is, due to how emotionally impactful it is. In those 5 times I rewatched it, that scene when Lilo says goodbye to Stitch and he hugs her saying he doesn't want to go, I cried every single time at it. Every single one. This movie is truly the best ending to a franchise that I can think of. There's nothing more I require. The only way things could get better from there is if my headcanon I'd been spinning for years about like what a now adult Lilo and Stitch adventure would be like. Which to me, I always thought that even though Skip shows that while Lilo ages, Stitch doesn't when they skip ahead in time, I always headcanoned that he didn't grow because he's not the one who activated it. Because to me, I always thought that when he grows up, similar to how Lilo does, he becomes the chubby surfer dude that a lot of fan art shows. He just likes chilling out and surfing while Lilo ends up growing up, and she's still the Galactic Earth Ambassador, but I imagine she still gets a job on Earth doing something really weird and like scientific. Basically that they live the typical happily ever after thing, and I don't know, there's not much else left to say, I guess. I should somehow finish this off briefly mentioning like shipping stuff. I guess because I somewhat mentioned it with the Angel bit. Yeah, I used to be a Lilo and Stitch shipper back then when I was doing my reviews, but at this point, I think that the pairings they have all fit fine. I still think Keone's pretty lame, but like Angel and Stitch, they work really well, especially in Leroy here. The tiny little interaction they have is really cute. And I didn't really see it at first, but especially now on the rewatches, I totally think that Jumba and Pleatley are a couple, and they don't want to admit it. Cause like I'm not someone who reads into stuff like this. I occasionally can find that kind of annoying where you're trying to force in something that isn't there. But here, I mean, they live together in the same room. They get almost married in an episode, and there's not any of the usual jokes that you get in these types of scenarios, like, oh no, I wouldn't get married to another guy or anything like that. No, Jumba never freaks out about it. He goes immediately right ahead with it. And then here in Leroy, when they've separated and Pleatley calls him, says like, oh, I put on the wig, and then he comes later with flowers. It's like legit, right? They're dating, right? This is the vibes I'm getting. Am I the only one? And then on a similar vein, you got Gantu and Ruben. Same case, it's 2 guys living together, and yeah, they dig on each other a lot, but especially with how it ends. Gantu making Ruben part of his crew, and then there's also just little small references throughout the series that are clips taken out of context, but it does kind of fit.
Looks like it's just you and me again, Daddykins.
There, if anyone was curious about my shipping stances on anything, there you go. That's it. It's out there. Do with that what you will. This must be a great betrayal for anyone who is super big into my reviews. Like, wait, what do you mean he likes Angel now? Didn't he spend like 20 minutes saying how much he hated it? Yeah, I know, right? The Lilo and Stitch franchise is truly a great franchise. It is one that I have loved and will continue to love. I'll keep rewatching it for the rest of my life. I truly love these characters and the world that they live in and all the different experiment designs that they came up with, and this wacky kids show that's not afraid to sometimes get really deep and really serious. It is just a truly fantastic franchise, and it is why Lilo and Stitch will always be something I love. The end. Thank you for anyone who has been here since the beginning, or for anyone who just started with this one. And I hope you enjoyed this mental trip that has taken 7 years of my life to get through. No, there's nothing else left to say.